There's
Whoops. Sorry, go ahead. I can cut it. Don't worry.
oh, okay, meetings and recording. I mean, got it. Okay. Share screen.
Gosh,
Now,
you've got
I'm
a
not
fancy
sure on this.
background there.
Oh, yeah. I just put that in. I just put that in.
I like that.
I've this is a little new. I've done videos before, and but this is the first one I will be doing with recorded.
Okay.
And okay. Participants 2, new share, annotation, remote control. I need to get the green screen here. Or I need to do, I've never done it using a slide presentation,
Oh, okay.
and I don't know if you know how.
Gosh,
Are
there should
you?
be something that says like maybe, oh, right above draw, between draw and design, there's that little easel kind of looking thing. If you push that, is that play, I wonder? Yes,
Start from the
I
beginning,
think that
start
might
to
I think
start
that
with the
might
first
I think that might
slide.
do it.
Okay, that is the
Oh,
first slide. So that works.
excellent.
Your screen is now shared. Stop sharing. Let's see how this works. Okay, yeah, this looks good.
Okay,
Okay,
great. All right.
so we'll,
Yeah, so I'm excited. I don't know much about this battle myself, so it's gonna be fun to learn along with the kids this week.
well, good. I hope you enjoy. Okay, this presentation is being made by the Kettle Creek Battlefield Association, and my name is Walker Tuning, and I am chairman of the Kettle Creek Battlefield Association. I'm here today to talk about the Battle of Kettle Creek, which took place on February the 14th, 1779. But of course, first I'm going to go over a little prehistory of Georgia.
Wonderful.
Georgia was founded by James Oglethorpe in 1732 at the request of King George II. England wanted a buffer colony to protect the Carolina colonies from a possible Spanish invasion from Florida and from the French in Louisiana. This new colony consisted of 8 parishes. From the 8 parishes, from the St. Paul's in the north to St. Mary's in the south, with Savannah as the main city and port. Here's St. Paul's here, and this is St. Mary's. So these are the first 8 parishes that were part of James Oglethorpe's colony.
And where's Savannah?
And Savannah is located right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Then in 1773, with the Treaty of Augusta, a large area to the north was ceded from the Creek Indians, that's this area here, for debts that they owed to the settlers and to the state. Then in 1777, this area was named Wilkes for John Wilkes, who was a colorful member of the British Parliament who opposed some of the British policies that eventually led to the American Revolution. Now, Wilkes County was the first county formed under the Georgia Constitution of 1777, and all of the land west of these colonies was still Creek Indian territory. So in July the 4th, 1775, when the Battle of Bunker Hill occurred and the American Revolution began, Georgia appeared something like this. It was only 42 years old and had a population of only 25,000 people. Most of the population was centered around Augusta down here, Augusta here, and Savannah on the Atlantic Ocean. Wilkes County was considered the frontier, and only a few brave settlers were in this area. This area here is Wilkes County.
Okay.
The settlers of the frontier of Georgia were mainly Scotch-Irish descent, and of course, they had no love for the redcoats. While many of the Savannah merchants were trading with England and did not want to provoke their British customers. However, the desire for independence was strong, and on July the 4th, 1775, 3 famous Georgians traveled to Philadelphia and signed the Declaration of Independence. They were Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton. You'll see their names on the bottom left-hand side of this Declaration of Independence. After Bunker Hill, General Washington moved his army to New York. But on August the 22nd, 1776, the British, under the command of General Howe, arrived in New York with 25,000 troops and the full force and fury of the British Empire. A woman who lived in Brooklyn said, "Hell was unleashed on the earth, thousands of redcoats, Hessians, and artillery." And a reporter wrote in a newspaper, "Never had a naval invasion like it been seen in modern times." Washington was driven from New York, and the patriot capital of Philadelphia was captured by the British. Washington managed to keep his army together, and at Valley Forge in 1775, under extreme hardship, he reemerged with an army ready to fight the British. Then in October 1777, Patriot Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold defeated the British General Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga. This British defeat allowed France and Spain to declare war on England and to declare their support for the British cause. The British then had to withdraw troops from the American colonies to defend their colonies in the Caribbean and elsewhere. The British now faced a world at war. As the Revolution developed into a stalemate into the northern colonies, the settlers along the frontier of Georgia were more afraid of the Creek Indians than the British. The British had armed the Creek and encouraged them to attack Patriot settlements. As the saying goes, "I'll see you tomorrow if the creeks don't rise." They were not talking about the stream next to their cabins.
I never knew that. I've heard that expression before. I never knew where it came from. That's interesting.
After the Battle of Saratoga, the British largely abandoned their operations in the northern colonies. On March the 8th, 1778, Secretary of War for King George, Lord George Germain, directed General Clinton to implement the British Southern strategy, believing that the British would gain support of the loyalists, slaves, and Indian allies in the South. This strategy called for the British to subdue the colonies of Georgia, Carolina, and Virginia, and to raise a provincial army to attack Washington from the South. The fighting in the southern colonies transformed the American Revolution into a civil war. The fighting was far more savage and personal than anything fought in the North. Both sides engaged in a scorched earth campaign that pitted neighbor against neighbor and brother against brother. On orders from General Howe, General Cornwallis was directed Lieutenant Colonel Archibald Campbell to capture Savannah as part of the British Southern strategy. And on December the 28th, Colonel Campbell captured Savannah and then moved on to capture Augusta in January the 31st, 1779. With these rapid successes, Colonel Campbell ordered Colonel John Boyd to proceed into the Carolinas and Major John Hamilton into Wilkes County in the backcountry of Georgia. The mission was to raise an army and to subdue any rebellion. Major Hamilton's methods were extremely brutal. claiming that those who refused to support King George were rebels and deserved to be hung. Colonel Hamilton moving into Wilkes County, and you can see Colonel Boyd moving up into the Carolinas. The battle on the frontiers were particularly brutal, with no quarter given by either side. Many of the settlers in Wilkes County fled from the oncoming British under Major Hamilton. Colonel Elijah Clark and Colonel John Dooley requested help from Colonel Pickens, who was at his home near Fort 96 in South Carolina. Colonel Pickens agreed to help if he was given overall command of the mission. And so he crossed the Savannah River in February with a force of 150 militia. Colonel Pickens joined with Colonel Clark, who had 60 militia, and Colonel Dooley, who commanded 100 militia. With this force of approximately 300 militiamen, Colonel Pickens set off in search of the British Major Hamilton. On February the 10th, 1779, Colonel Pickens surrounded Major Hamilton at Carr's Ford, which is down here. It's only 12 miles from Kettle Creek. Hearing that 96 and South Carolina, his home in South Carolina, might be attacked by Colonel Boyd, he abandoned the siege of Carr's Fort and raced back across the Savannah River to defend his home, only to learn that Colonel Boyd had moved further north and crossed the river into Georgia at Van's Creek. Reacting to this information, he again crossed back across the Savannah River into Georgia in search of Colonel Boyd's redcoats. Colonel Boyd had crossed into Georgia and was marching south along the Savannah River, as was unaware of Colonel Pickens' movements and probably was in search of Major Hamilton. Colonel Boyd was returning from the Carolinas and had an unsuccessful attempt to raise an army of British provincial forces, which he expected to be 6,000, but had only managed to convince 700 men who would support the British cause.
Wow.
When Lieutenant Colonel Boyd and his loyalists began their march on the morning of February the 14th, 1779, they were tired, wet, and hungry from the cold February weather. Colonel Boyd was unaware of any danger from Patriot militia since he was fresh from his victory at Van's Creek. Marching south and expecting to reach Wrightsboro that day, Wrightsboro, which is a Quaker town under British control, Colonel Boyd decided to rest and feed his men. Arriving at the Hammett farm along Kettle Creek, his men commandeered or stole cattle from a nearby pasture and began preparations for a hot meal. Pickets were placed around the edge of the camp, and some were slaughtering a cow for their meal. Colonel Pickens had sent out spies to find the location of the British forces. The local settlers were more than glad to help the Patriots, and in the morning, Pickett's spies had located Colonel Boyd and his men along Kettle Creek. Although the Loyalist forces were numerically superior to the Patriot militia, Colonel Pickens was determined to have a fight. Colonel Pickens heard the drums of the Loyalist forces calling for an assembly. He sent out an advance guard with orders to find the Loyalists, but not to engage. Colonel Pickens met with Colonel Dooley and Colonel Clark. Colonel Pickens decided that Colonel Clark was to take his left flank and Colonel Dooley was to deploy on his right flank. Colonel Pickens realized that he had a smaller number of militia than the Loyalists, so his plan was to divide his Patriots into 3 columns and to advance from 3 different sides. He was hoping to surprise the Loyalists and have the advantage and have the appearance of a large force of militia, and this would give him his needed advantage. At approximately 10 a.m., Colonel Pickens' advance guard came upon Colonel Boyd's pickets slaughtering a cow, and they opened fire. While Colonel Clark was sent to the left and Colonel Dooley was sent to the right, Colonel Pickens advanced across a cleared field towards the sound of the musket fire. Colonel Boyd, hearing the exchange of fire, took 100 of his men up the hill to a picket fence and had his men lay down behind the fence. As Colonel Pickens approached in line towards the picket fence, Colonel Boyd fired and the battle had begun. It's important to note at this time that the Patriots under command of Pickens, Dooley, and Clark were made up of militia that had been fighting together for several years against the Creek Indians and were therefore better trained. While many of the men under Colonel Boyd's were newly recruited and their loyalties were suspect, this was an advantage for the Patriots. While Colonel Pickens began his attack, Colonel Clark and Colonel Dooley were encountering rough goings in the swamps and canebrakes that filled the area on the left and right flanks along Kettle Creek. Colonel Pickens continued to advance, and when some of the Patriot militia saw the brightly colored uniform of a British officer, they fired. Colonel Boyd was mortally wounded and was carried from the field. With the loss of Colonel Boyd, the British began to fall back, and what had begun as a loyalist advantage was now turning into a British disaster. As the British fell back, they tried to mount a defense along the Colonial Road. British Major Spurgeons mounted a defense on a hill on the south side of Kettle Creek, but this faltered when Colonel Clark emerged from the canebrake along Kettle Creek. As Colonel Clark crossed the creek, his horse was shot out from under him, but he got another horse from Austin Dabney and continued the fight across the creek. Major Spurgeons abandoned his position and fled with many of his loyalists towards Wrightsboro. After the battle, Colonel Pickens met with the dying Colonel Boyd. Colonel Boyd, who proudly proclaimed to all that it would be heard that he died for his king and country, while telling the pious Presbyterian Pickens that he wanted no prayers from the damn rebel, but that he would have succeeded only if he had not been shot. The victorious South Carolinian accepted the items from the dying man to bring to Boyd's wife, who was a relation of Pickens. Colonel Pickens ordered that some of the prisoners be released if they would bury the loyalists where they had fallen. He also ordered that Colonel Boyd be buried in a Christian-like manner. Many of the prisoners at the Battle of Kettle Creek were pardoned because it was felt that they were forced to fight with the loyalists. However, 5 were later hung at Fort 96. The Battle of Kettle Creek ended about noon on February the 14th, 1779. After the battle, this battle demonstrated the serious flaws of the British Southern strategy. The results of the battle were reported in newspapers as far away as Boston, Massachusetts, and London, England. The British never again ventured in force into the backcountry. In 1811, General Pickens wrote in his memoirs, "I believe that this is the severest check and chastisements the Tories ever received in South Carolina or Georgia." Kettle Creek fell back into a sleep, and the only thing that was conducted in the area was farming. After 1998 to the present, a 3-day celebration is conducted in Washington, Georgia, by the Georgia Society Sons of the American Revolution. In 2011, the Kettle Creek Battlefield Association was created to develop and preserve this historic battlefield. The KCBA has acquired part of the battlefield and increased its size from the 12.5 acres that was purchased in 1900 to a total of 252 acres today. It has conducted many archaeological studies which have revealed artifacts and grave sites. Artifacts discovered have been placed on display at the Washington Wilkes Historical Museum for viewing by visitors. In 2015, an effort was made to find the location of the Revolutionary soldiers who were buried on the battlefield. Cadaver dogs and ground penetrating radar were used to find the graves. These are the cadaver dogs that were used. Their names were Groucho, Chance, and Cinco. The graves study revealed 28 graves of fallen Revolutionary soldiers around the battlefield, and they were marked with white crosses. Several of the graves were opened by Southeastern Archaeological, and the soil was tested for human remains by the Canadian Institute of Anthropology. Human DNA was confirmed in all of the exposed grave sites. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation of the Kettle Creek Battlefield. Additional information can be found at the Kettle Creek Battlefield Association website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. It's so interesting how, even today, like you said, there wasn't that long ago, they're still finding artifacts and finding grave sites, and, history is never really that far away.
That's very true, yes.
Yeah.
We still have another 120 acres of the battlefield that we need to acquire, which will have some more graves on it.
Yeah.
And they've currently applied for a grant through the DNR to add some recreational trails for mountain biking onto the current battlefield area. It will not be in the historical portion, but will be in an adjacent section. So we welcome you to come out and take a look at it. You can walk around and see the grave sites. You can find 28 of the crosses and send me a picture of you next to them, and I'll send you back a prize.
Ooh, sounds fun.
You're welcome.
Right.